Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Noahic covenant. And some of the things we're going to talk about are Cain and Abel, the Nephilim, clean and unclean animals, and Noah and the flood. Because guess what? It's the Noahic covenant. So remember, we're looking at humanity as a child that's growing, okay? So in the Adamic covenant, Adam and Eve were like in the womb. They were protected. They're perfectly protected. They walked with God. They talked with God. They communed with God. He gave them everything. And it was like being in a womb. But you can't have a child in the womb forever if you want to have a relationship with them. And so God put a tree, even though he knew that Adam and Eve would eat of the tree. He put it in there. And they were sort of birthed, pushed out of the garden, and but now God could have a relationship with them, and now humanity's starting to grow. So the next phase is sort of the toddler phase. If you have children, if you remember that phase, yes, this is the phase of the toddler phase, right? You know, they get into everything and they're so innocent, they're so cute, but oh my word, you know, that you just pull your hair out because they cannot comprehend right and wrong yet, right? They just do what they think they should do when they want to do it. So during this time period, we're going to see that humanity did whatever they wanted. Their knowledge and understanding of God and what he expected was too difficult for them to comprehend. As any parent, God saw all the things that people were getting into, and he was very sad. He made a decision to choose one child that had found grace in his eyes and start over. So we're going to start at Genesis 4, 3-8. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. I think when it says his face fell, it's, I guess, a way to say he became depressed. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, you will not, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." So God was saying you have these things in you that are sinful things within you, and you have to rule over them. You have to take control of them. And then Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. So the first murder really was one, if you really think about it, it was one of pride. Cain did not humble himself before the Lord. Maybe, and this is all speculation, he felt he was better than his brother because he was the firstborn. And when he saw that God was pleased with Abel and not his, he became jealous. And maybe he knew that God wanted a blood sacrifice, but he decided that his offering should be good enough or maybe even better. So we don't really know what was in Cain's heart, but I would imagine that Cain knew that he should have a blood sacrifice. Adam and Eve knew there was a blood sacrifice. I'm sure God explained that you needed a blood sacrifice. So maybe he was too lazy to go out and get him an animal to sacrifice. We don't really know, except for the fact that he was not happy that God accepted his brothers and not him. God warned Cain, okay? So he warned him. So this is before Cain killed Abel. So God warned him that he must rule over it. And the basis of all sin really is pride. In Genesis 4, 9-11, it says, "Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Where's your brother Abel?' He said, 'I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?' And the Lord said, 'What have you done?' The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So we know that at this point, Cain still had an opportunity to stay in fellowship with God, because we all know that God knew, he already knew where Abel was. Okay. So he was asking Cain because I think he was hoping Cain would just say, "Oh, God, I got angry and I sinned against you and I killed him and whatever." It's sort of like when you have a child and it's something's broken and you kind of know that child broke it. You'll say, "Okay, who broke this?" Because you want them to be able to confess, "I broke it." Okay. So he wanted him to admit his sin and ask for forgiveness. We can't hide our sinfulness from God. He wants to forgive and have fellowship with us. However, there must be an acknowledgement of doing wrong and not wanting to offend God again. But Cain chose to remain prideful and go his own way. So he could not humble himself. He couldn't come to the point where he said, "Yeah, I let anger get the better of me. I know you warned me, God, and I didn't listen." No, he was too prideful. So after that, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, "God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him." I think Seth means appointed one. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So now, Adam and Eve, I think they were passing on everything God had told them to Seth. Okay. And Cain went his own way, and eventually the lineage of Cain was all killed in the flood. Of course, Abel, he died. So it was through Seth that the rest of humanity came. And of course, Adam and Eve probably had more children. For sure, they probably had daughters. And otherwise, there wouldn't be a offspring. So there's probably more, but this is all the Bible records. God always upholds a remnant of people to continue his plans. Cain had chosen to follow Satan and disregard the ways of God. So Eve conceived and brought forth Seth into a loving relationship with God. Thus, we will see what happens to the world when people turn their back on God. It becomes corrupt. So the next thing we see in Genesis is the Nephilim. It's in Genesis 6, 1 through 8. I'm sure you've probably read about it or heard about it. It's become more popular now because of the things that are going on in our world. So more people are aware of it. But for a long time, you never heard anything about it. For sure, pastors still don't really preach too much on it. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, angelic beings, demonic beings, saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children unto them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." So a lot of people believe that a lot of the characters you see, like in Greek mythology and all these things, were actually probably, they may be stories of real people kind of embellished. And they might have been the Nephilim, because it says here in the Bible, "These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." So that's what some people believe. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Remember, we talked about the seed under the Adamic covenant. We talked about the seed and how important the seed was to humanity. And the seed had to be pure. There had to be a pure seed in order for the Messiah to come. And so when the angels or demonic beings were going into the daughters of man, the seed was being corrupted. So there was a corruption of the seed. And so this is real important. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So I can't say why God decided this, but I have a feeling a lot of it had to do with the seed of man. The seed of humanity was so corrupt. Matthew 24:37 says, for as were the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man. So what were the things that were going on in the days of Noah? Well, everyone was corrupt, and the angelic beings, the demonic beings, were having sex with the women of the earth. So a lot of people, we're going to see right now that you hear a lot about this going on right now in present day. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. So there has always been giants. The most famous giant is, what's the most famous giant?
Goliath.
Goliath. Right. So we know there were giants even in King David's day. Apparently, these half-human beings may still exist. Not that they are necessarily evil beings, but maybe have some of the DNA of their seed. So here again, it's about the seed. But in Noah's day, it became corrupt. They didn't know God. So this was kind of this was interesting. The Air Force showed videos of 2 recently declassified cases of unidentified objects observed by U.S. military drones to demonstrate AARO's analytic process. Whatever, I don't know what AARO's is. The first video, showing an apparently spherical object observed in the Middle East in 2022, remains unsolved for lack of data. So apparently this is a real picture that they took. I don't know. Another thing that was in the news recently was a Las Vegas family claimed something crashed in their backyard, prompting them to call 911 about non-human beings. The thing is, this time, several people saw it. The Air Force testified in Congress that they have seen and have the bodies of non-human beings. So these people in Las Vegas said that these huge creatures were in their backyard. And when the police got there, they also saw them, but I guess they disappeared. The problem is nobody takes a picture of them, so it's kind of like it's hard to believe. Some other things that have been in the news is unidentified flying objects. You know, they've renamed them. We call them UFOs, but they call them something else now. Anyway, I can't remember the term. They call them something other than UFOs. Kilpatrick was testifying before the Senate Armed Service Committee, the second such Capitol Hill appearance for Pentagon officials over the past year, as lawmakers take an increased interest in the unexplained incursions amid fears that the vehicles may be operated by America's adversaries. So some people are saying there's Martians. Some people saying, oh, they're from a different planet. They're aliens. And so the Vatican's even gotten in on this. The Vatican's chief astronomer says there's no conflict between believing in God and in the possibility of extraterrestrial brothers. Perhaps they're even more evolved than humans. Also, the Vatican astronomer says if aliens exist, they may not need redemption. Oh my. So Vatican City said if aliens exist, they may be a different life form that does not need Christ's redemption, the Vatican chief astronomer said. So we're seeing this more and more and more. I'm sure you've seen stuff about it. And we have to ask ourselves, are these aliens really demons? All right, so this is kind of interesting. It's the lineage from Adam to Seth all the way to Noah. So you see here that this is the year they were born. Okay, if you're going up, I mean, once Christ came, we went backwards, right? But if you start at year 1, Seth was born when Adam was 130 years old. This is how old they were at their death. The oldest man ever was Methuselah, and he didn't really die. He died in the flood. So he could have even been older. Remember Enoch, he never died. He was raptured, transported, taken to heaven. The interesting thing is that Noah was 14 when Seth died. This is how the words of the Lord were preserved from Adam. They were handed down by the patriarchs. So Adam told Seth, Seth told Enosh, they just passed it down. And if Lamech wanted to, if he didn't know what the answer was, he'd go to Seth. Or Lamech could have even gone to Adam and asked. So the fact that it's not written down doesn't mean anything. They knew each other, and Noah knew Seth. He was 14 when he died, so he had to have at least talked to him. I thought that was really interesting. We don't know everything that was passed down, but we know from Noah, they knew what animals were clean and unclean. They also knew to sacrifice both animals and grain as offerings to God. So these are some things we know. We know they were told to sacrifice because of Cain and Abel. And we know that they knew clean and unclean because of Noah. Genesis 7:2 says, take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate. So God told Adam to take clean and unclean. Well, if he didn't know what they were, he would have asked. But apparently he knew. So they already knew which animals were clean, which animals were not clean. Because there are animals that we can eat, and there's animals that we can't eat. God made some animals to be scavengers and clean the environment. They are not to be eaten because they absorb toxins and then don't release them through their skin. So they're like vacuum cleaners of the earth. If you have fish, you need well, I can't think the name of them, but you need a scavenger fish at the bottom to clean up all the poop. Okay, so these animals eat everything. The unclean animals do. These dietary laws were initiated probably from the beginning of time. It was how God created the world to function, and Noah knew what they were. In Leviticus 11:2, when they started writing things down, it still says, speak to the people of Israel, saying, these are the living things that you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. So I've heard people say that before Noah, all they ate was fruits and vegetables, but Noah knew which were clean and unclean. And God told them to take some clean animals on the boat. Probably, what do you think? Probably to eat, right? Leviticus 11:47 says to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. The other thing about clean and unclean, for some reason, people seem to think that God just made this up, that these animals are really okay to eat. He was just tempting them, I guess, or he was like putting this in front of them and saying, well, I know these are really okay for you to eat, but I'm going to just see if you're going to disobey me. But that's not anything that it says in the Old Testament. It says you don't eat them because they're scavengers. So we're going to look at, just so you'll know, what the clean and unclean animals are. If they have cloven hooves and chew the cud, those are clean. Leviticus 11 says, among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, and chews the cud, you may eat. But it has to have both. In other words, it can't have, you'll see here in a minute, okay? The Bible goes on to say that the camel and rabbit are not acceptable to eat because they chew their cud, but they don't have split hooves. On the flip side, pigs are also not acceptable to eat, having cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. All other land animals are forbidden by the Bible, which include mice, reptiles, amphibians, mollusks.
Mollusks.
How do you say it?
Mollusks.
Mollusks, yeah. And we don't really eat tiger or elephant or zebra. There's just things we don't eat, okay? As far as of the sea, we have fins and scales. Concerning fish, we are told in Leviticus 11, 9, and 12, these you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales, that shall be an abomination to you. Tuna, salmon, and trout are clean, as well as any other fish that have both fins and scales. Only sea creatures that have scales and fins are suitable for food. Therefore, this would eliminate oysters, shellfish, crabs, lobster, shrimp, and many other types of seafood as foods safe to eat.
No.
I know. Well, I know. Now, here's the thing. You're not going to hell if you eat these foods, For me, this is just the way God would like us to eat to stay healthy, okay? And he even says in the New Testament that if you go into someone's home and they offer you food that are not clean, that you can go ahead and eat them. You don't want to offend the person by saying, oh, I can't eat that. What are you serving me that for, So it's sort of like, I know that sugar's bad for me, but occasionally I eat it. So I definitely try to stay away from these things, but occasionally I do eat some of this, but very, very rarely, because I know God says it's bad for me. These are things that are bad for me to eat. They're not really, the Jews never really considered them food, and because God said at the very beginning, these are not food for you to eat. So they don't consider them food. Continuing in Leviticus, it says, and these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, what do they all have in common? They're scavengers. They eat dead things and dead bugs and worms, and bad worms. The list continues to verse 19 and includes the kites, the falcons, the ravens, the ostriches, the owls, the seagulls, the hawks, the storks, and the herons and the bats. But thank goodness you can eat chicken. We wouldn't
And turkey.
and turkey. Wouldn't have chicken nuggets or Thanksgiving. Yeah. All right. So God even talked about the bugs. Now, of course, they're wanting us to go into not eat meat anymore, but eat bugs instead. Well, if so, here's the bugs you can eat. God even includes insects in his list of clean and unclean animals. Leviticus 11, 22, 23 states that these you may eat, the locust after its kind, and destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. So I'm not going to eat a fly. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. I don't even really want to eat a cricket or a locust, but John the Baptist ate locusts. And he was not, someone in a Sunday school class said that they said that locusts were unclean. And I said, no, locusts are clean. John the Baptist wasn't disobeying God. He could eat the locust. So the question is, should we eat pork? Okay, this is the big thing. Increased risk of illness or deadly disease of consuming pork that was handled improperly. So most people say, well, we can eat pork now because we handle it better. They're raised in pens and they're not as dirty as they used to be. But that's really not the point. The point is that God made them a scavenger. And so the risk is mainly due to parasites and toxins that pigs' bodies carry in them due to their unique physiological makeup. So it's the way God made the animal that it absorbs toxins, but the toxins get in the meat. And so when you eat pork, that's why you have to make sure you cook it really, 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 really well, because you can get all these parasites. We know that pigs are scavengers that like to eat rotten meat, worms, and other disgusting items, and spend far less time digesting their food than cows and other animals. So that's not else I found out. It's interesting. Scavenger animals don't have a fancy spot in the ecosystem, and they do not have a cute reputation either. People have always considered scavengers like vultures, hyenas, dirty, disgusting creatures. However, whatever you may feel about them, scavengers play an important role in maintaining a balanced ecosystem. You can view scavenger animals as the cleanup crew, saving the world from diseases and other dangers in decaying organisms. Pigs were officially used. Now, this is kind of gross, but I'm going to tell you, when I saw this, I'm like, oh my, I try not to eat pork, but occasionally sausage, I think, is in stuff I eat. I don't, here again, for me, it's not like a legalistic thing where I'm going to hell or anything. It's a thing that God wants us to do to keep healthy. Pigs were officially used in old houses to eat human excreta in the absence of sewage systems. That the pig pens were built to ensure that they got human waste directly and could dispose of it immediately, more or less as it fell. And that these pigs were actually kept to grace the tables and palates of the goans in the city of India. So, they didn't have flush toilets. So instead of a flush toilet, they got a pig, and the pig would come and eat it up. Oh. The other thing that is interesting is, and now this is kind of complicated, but it's about the pigs and the wild boar being used as sacrifices. So the consumption of pork in Hittite Anatolia is unlikely to have been a simple matter of geography or ethnicity, but was governed by a complex set of principles involving determiners like status, gender, and the level of cultic influence from religious sanctuaries. So the higher your status, the more likely you were to eat pork, is what it's saying, or the wild boar. On the few occasions that the Hittite text refers directly to eating pork, the context is highly ritualized, suggesting that special religious significance was sometimes attached to the eating of pig's flesh. Further, drawing an evidence from the society surrounding the Mediterranean basin, a case can be made for the private nature of pig sacrifice in Hittite Anatolia. They were killed to ensure the well-being of the community and the fertility of humans and crops. A festival performed in Istanbul to reaffirm the human-divine relationship may parallel the practice of sacrificing a pig at the ratification of treaties in the classical world. Finally, this animal's unique place among the domesticates extends to its role as a substitute for humans, a ritual motive that can be found throughout the Mediterranean in antiquity. So where God had them sacrifice goats and cows and that sort of thing, the pagan world were sacrificing pigs. And when we get to the Tower of Babel, we're going to see why pigs were sacrificed, because we're going to see some of the stories that come out of Babylon. Acts 21:25 says, "But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we have sent a letter with our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols." So is it saying, yes, you should stay away from pork? I don't know. Since pork was most likely sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. I don't know.
It's also interesting to note that in modern day science, the tissues of pig have been used to also to be replacement for human parts, like the valves of the heart.
That's true.
And sometimes the skin of the pig is used to replace the skin of humans who have been burned or have had an accident. So there is sort of like the parts of the pig have close how do you say, similarities to the human compatibility to the human cells.
Wow. Yeah, because my dad had a pig's valve.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my dad had one. I forgot about that. You're right. So it's close to being a cannibal in a way, because there's so many similarities, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we're going to go back to Noah in Genesis 6:11-14. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. So here again, there's the Nephilim, remember, and there's a lot of violence and sexual immorality. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. So when it says all flesh has been corrupted, here again, we're going to see over and over the DNA and the seed of man. Remember, from the very beginning, the curse was that it looked like that Satan was going to try to get to the seed of man, to corrupt it. Because if he could corrupt it, here again, then the Messiah would not be a perfect, sinless human being and God, both. It couldn't be both, because all flesh would have been corrupted. So could it be that the human seed had been mingled with the angelic beings far beyond the point where it could be recovered? So, something to think about, that he just had to start over because it had gotten so bad. Genesis 7:4 says, "For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And so 40 represents, does anybody know what 40, the number does? The number 40? So 40 is it's a renewal. It's a transformation and a renewal.
Well,
A testing of sorts that it transforms you, your thinking, your way of life, everything. It's transformed in 40 days. I went through counseling one time, and I had some what's called stinking thinking, and my counselor said, "I want you to put on a card a scripture verse that helps you." For example, I would say, "I'm so stupid," or "I'm so ugly," and then I'd put on the card, "God made all things beautiful." And so whenever I would think that, I would take out the card and I'd read it. And she said, after 40 days, basically, she said, your mind, you won't think those thoughts anymore because it's transformed your mind. And that, Bible says, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, think on these things. And so after 40 days, it will transform your mind. Did somebody want to say something?
Yes, 4 is foundation of things. As if you are sitting in a chair, there's 4 corners, or a house comes in 4 corners. The throne of God, as in 4 corners, it's the foundation of things under God. And so if you have 40, which is on a 10, a 4 times 10, 10 means ordained. So 40 would mean to me a foundation for what is ordained.
That'd be good too. That's good. Okay, Genesis 8:4 says, "And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountain of Ararat, and 1 Peter 3 says, "God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. And this water symbolizes baptism, which shows you are saved, not by the removal of dirt from the body, but by a clear conscience towards God, coming through the water to a new life in Yeshua. You are saved by the resurrection of Jesus Christ." So basically, it's a picture, sort of a picture of salvation. And the thing is, we're going to see here, and we're going to see it in other places, where God's invitation was to everyone. Noah preached for what? 180 years? I can't remember how long it was. He preached for a long time, and he invited people to come. But guess what? Only 8 people made that choice, because he wasn't like keeping people from getting aboard the ark. And so everyone has that invitation, but you have to be willing to come. And so baptism, you go through the water to a new life. And so the boat, the ark went through the water to a new life. So we're going to look at the Noahic covenant, because that's what we're talking about tonight, was the Noahic covenant. What was it? Well, we all know it's a rainbow. Genesis 9:11, "I will establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the whole earth." Doesn't mean there won't be floods. It's not going to flood the whole earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." And God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant I established between me and all life on the earth. And so these covenants, the Adamic covenant, it's eternal. You know, it doesn't have an ending point. The Noahic covenant, it's eternal. It doesn't have an ending point. We're going to see that these covenants are everlasting. And so that's